The courtroom felt different. No eyes glaring from the highest bench. No gavel strikes meant to silence, not maintain order. No veiled condescension masquerading as protocol. For the first time since the storm began, Jasmine Crockett stepped into the courthouse not as a defendant of disruption but as a witness with a right to speak. The contempt order had been vacated. The news dropped quietly but echoed everywhere. Justice Amy Coney Barrett had been officially recused after growing pressure from civil rights groups, legal scholars, and members of Congress. A review panel was still pending, but the damage had been done to her authority, her judgment, her legacy. The system had blinked, and the country noticed. But Jasmine knew it wasn't over. Barrett was gone from the case, but the game was still in motion. Power didn't just retreat, it recalibrated. Now, in her place, sat Judge Lionel Monroe, an old-school federal judge with a spine of steel and a history of keeping his court clean. Monroe had no flair for drama. He didn't tweet. He didn't lecture. He listened. And he ruled, fairly, ruthlessly, without fear. Jasmine entered the chamber flanked by her counsel, Michael Reyes, whose usually sharp stride was subdued. There was no need to play offense today. Not yet. Reporters were still outside, but the circus had quieted. People were watching, yes, but now with intent, not just curiosity. The world had seen what happened. It had felt the imbalance, and Jasmine had become more than a target, she'd become a symbol. As she took her seat at the witness table, she felt the weight of that symbol pressing on her shoulders. But it didn't crush her. It reminded her she was still here, and she still had something to say. Federal Courthouse, say 9 a.m. The bailiff called the court to order. The low murmurs hushed. The prosecutors adjusted their files. Across from Jasmine, they looked different now, not smug, but careful. Judge Monroe, calmly, this court resumes the matter of testimony under Case FR 2025. The court acknowledges that the previous contempt ruling has been vacated, and that witness Jasmine Crockett is cleared to continue her statement under the protections granted by law. He paused, scanning the room. Judge Monroe countered, "This is not a stage. This is not a spectacle. This is a court, and we will proceed accordingly." He nodded toward the prosecution. The lead prosecutor, a man named Gavin Roth, stepped forward, slick, polished. But this time, he knew better than to grandstand. The internet hadn't been kind to him after the courtroom video leaked. Roth: Congresswoman Crockett, thank you for returning. I'd like to ask strictly within the bounds of this case about the series of internal memos regarding ethics oversight in 2023. Specifically, your statements around procedural manipulation. Jasmine nodded slowly, keeping her tone even. Jasmine: yes, I gave a statement that year, expressing concern about selective enforcement of rulers, how procedures were used to silence debate rather than promote transparency. Roth: were you referring to a specific event? Jasmine: I was referring to a pattern, one that punishes dissent more than it prevents misconduct. He shifted, trying to press without pushing. Roth: do you believe that pattern exists in this courtroom? Jasmine: not anymore. The room paused. It was subtly but heavy. Monroe said nothing, just wrote something down quietly. Roth cleared his throat. Roth: let's move on. Courthouse. Say later that day. Outside the courthouse, crowds had returned, not massive, but purposeful. Signs reading "Let her testify. Truth doesn't bow," and "No more silencing" bobbed above heads. They weren't protesting anymore. They were standing witness. Inside, the tone of the hearing had shifted. Where once there had been a hostile tension, now there was an uneasy respect. Jasmine's composure had become undeniable. Roth didn't try to trap her anymore. He tried to survive the transcript. By midday, she had walked through hours of testimony detailing policy concerns, exposing process gaps, and answering each question with the clarity of someone who had nothing left to fear. Her presence didn't just occupy the room, it anchored it. But Monroe had one more move. Judge Monroe: before we recess for the day, I have one question of my own. The room stilled. Judge Monroe countered, Congresswoman, You stated in previous testimony that you believe elements of the judicial process were being used to discipline voices rather than examine facts. I'd like to know, what do you believe justice should look like? Jasmine blinked. She hadn't expected a question like that. Not in federal court. Not from a judge who kept his cards buried. But she didn't hesitate. Jasmine, justice should feel like protection, not punishment. It should make the powerless feel seen, not hunted. And when someone dares to speak the truth, especially when it's uncomfortably, justice should lean in, not lash out. Monroe didn't smile, but something flickered. Judge Monroe, thank you. Court is adjourned for the day. The gavel fell. This time, Jasmine didn't flinch. Hotel room A night. Back at the hotel, Jasmine peeled off her blazer, sat on the edge of the bed, and exhaled deeply. Her phone buzzed constantly, calls from colleagues, messages from supporters, interview requests from every major outlet. She didn't answer any of them. She opened her email instead. There, buried among the notifications, was one flagged in red, from U.S. House Judiciary Committee. Subject: request for testimony, a special hearing on judicial accountability. She stared at it. A month ago, this kind of invitation would have meant nothing. A panel, a formality. But now it was momentum. House Chamber A. 1 week later. It was a packed hearing. C-SPAN cameras were everywhere. What had started as a procedural case had erupted into a full-blown national debate. How much unchecked power is too much? Jasmine sat before the committee, again in white, again calm. The chair of the committee, Representative Lee, addressed her. Rep. Lee, Congresswoman Crockett, thank you for appearing. We are reviewing the conduct of judicial officers, including federal judges and justices, in politically sensitive cases. We ask that you recount what happened, from your view, not as a legal witness, but as an elected official who experienced it. Jasmine leaned forward. No paper, no script. Jasmine, what happened to me wasn't just about me. It was a warning. When the highest seats of power are used not to mediate, but to intimidate, we cross a line. I was silenced not because I shouted, but because I wouldn't shrink. And if it can happen in that room, it can happen anywhere. Rep. Lee, do you believe Justice Barrett abused her role? Jasmine, I believe she used it to send a message. But the people sent one back. That quote became the headline. Supreme Court A. Behind closed doors. Barrett remained silent, officially, but inside the halls of the Supreme Court, whispers swirled. There were rumors she was considering stepping back from high-profile disciplinary proceedings altogether. The other justices were divided. Some quietly agreed with her actions, others were deeply disturbed by the blowback. One clerk reportedly said, "It's not about Barrett anymore. It's about the credibility of the bench." A legacy had cracked. Whether it shattered was still uncertain. Jasmine's office a month later. Jasmine sat by the window. The subpoena that started it all was gone, filed away. In its place was a letter from the Congressional Black Caucus, inviting her to co-chair a new initiative on judicial accountability. She didn't smile much, but she allowed herself one now. Michael Ray's stepped in. Ray's, you're everywhere now. Media, editorials. Law schools are teaching the hearing in first-year courses. Jasmine, then I guess we don't waste it. Ray's, so what now? She turned, looking out at the Capitol. Jasmine, now we write the law that makes sure this never happens again. National Mall A. 6 months later. A peaceful march. Not massive, but disciplined. Intentional. Across signs and shirts were the same two words. Without Barrett. Not a rallying cry of hatred but of change. What began as one woman refusing to shrink had become something else entirely. A reminder that justice doesn't begin or end in a courtroom. It begins in the voice that chooses to speak even when silenced. And now, it had found its echo.